To say the Catholic Church has a checkered past might be the understatement of the millennium. On one hand, there are scores of charity work and moral guidance to world leaders, but on the other, there are sexual abuse scandals and historical atrocities against alleged heretics and non-believers. But the institution is as much a product of its time as the men who headed it, and as the oldest institution in the Western world, there were bound to be some blots on its 2,000-year-old reputation. What that means, though, is many of the men who led the papacy were far from the ideal of their Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. So it's time to learn how history works as we highlight the 10 worst popes so that we can understand how much the Catholic Church has changed over the years. To start, let's look at the most well-known trait of the Pope, celibacy. Catholics have a conservative attitude towards sex, so the head of the church is expected to be a living example of abstinence. So much so that the idea of virginity seems so synonymous with the duty of the papacy that to hear a pope was ever even a horny teenager sounds like something straight out of a sitcom. Yet John XII was just 18 when he assumed the most powerful position in the church, which meant he was full of raging hormones when he was bestowed with divine infallibility. This gave him free rein to turn the church into a brothel. Sex was everywhere. Prostitutes were as common as nuns. Some historians even claim John XII fornicated with his own sisters. So it's ironic that his bed jumping was his undoing, though the exact details are debated. Some say he suffered a heart attack when rolling around with a mistress. Others say her husband, a nobleman, caught the Pope in the act and beat the Pope to a pulp. But the most accepted is that the nobleman actually threw John out of a window where he fell to the hard floor, ending his life in reign of sexual deviancy and hypocrisy. Nowadays, the popes have no direct military power, so you can be forgiven for not knowing that the Papal States had armies to defend and spread their message. This is where Boniface VIII's reputation for fighting comes in. He was infamous for his stubbornness and my way or the highway approach. Clearly, he wasn't in Catholic school when they studied humility and turning the other cheek. In fact, he held himself in such high regard in both celestial and terrestrial terms that he involved himself in international affairs, even proclaiming that foreign kings and leaders were under his control. His bid for papal supremacy led him to have many wars and raise many villages, sometimes purely out of spite and without any meaningful military advantage. But his worst enemy would be the writer Dante, who after being excommunicated by Boniface's thugs, immortalized the prideful pope in the 8th layer of hell in Dante's Inferno. The third entry in this list contrasts the murdering sleaze of John and the petulant warmongering of Boniface by being somewhat of a decent man. Pope Clement VII has a sympathetic resume. He offered refuge for the Jews who were made scapegoats to the plague, and his interest in the arts and the science gave him an aura of intelligence and understanding. He commissioned Michelangelo to paint the Sistine Chapel and approved Copernicus's theory that the Earth rotates around the sun. Yet he lacked management skills. He enjoyed the high life. To fund his lavish lifestyle, he would have to dip into the savings made by his frugal predecessors, but even that barely kept him afloat. He had an idea, but raising taxes and selling off bishoprics doesn't do wonders for your reputation. To make matters worse, his respect as a statesman came crashing down when he failed to resolve the political turmoil of the time. He couldn't stop King Henry VIII of England from leaving the Catholic Church. He couldn't stop Martin Luther in his Protestant Reformation. Worse, his souring relationship with the Holy Emperor led to the sack of Rome. He may have been decent as a man, but when it came to his job, his less than mediocre performance and overspending were catastrophes. Pope Urban II started off as a successful diplomat, but when he assumed the papacy, he moved on from his training in conflict resolution in favor of sadism. The seeds for this can be seen in his response to the then King of Byzantine's help to rebel against the invading Turks. Urban agreed to help in the Just War, which effectively started the first crusade between Christians and Muslims. But Urban was not concerned about staining the papacy with blood, as his own election had split the church into 2 or 3, depending on who was counting, with competing popes fighting to be the ruler. When it came to dealing with traitors, which is to say, opponents, Urban did not show mercy. He is noted as saying that the screams of tortured cardinals were not loud enough. No surprise then that he had no reservation when it came to galvanizing the pious Christian soldiers in his holy war, even though they would be spurned out to commit terrible atrocities against their enemy Turks, Jews, and even Christian brothers. The 5th placement on this list goes to Pope Stephen VI, who proves that for some holy men, death is just the beginning. Stephen didn't exactly see eye to eye with his predecessor, Pope Formosus, and so took the chance to put him on trial, even though the defendant had been dead for months. The body was exhumed, put on a throne, and questioned about allegations of perjury and corruption. Needless to say, the dead man didn't have a strong enough defense to dodge a guilty verdict. As punishment, Stephen ordered the rule of Formosus to be annulled and for the corpse to be dragged through the street and dumped in the river. Stephen may have felt vindicated, but the macabre show trial soured people's attitudes towards him in what was already a politically turbulent time. The public rose up and imprisoned Stephen, where he was strangled to death by an inmate. But when it comes to being fired from your job, Pope Benedict IX holds the record with 3 reigns. He first became Pope at 12 when his father obtained an election through bribery. Soon though, Benedict was driven from Rome only to mount a comeback some months later with his supporters. He was then paid to step aside so that his godfather could succeed him, only to have second thoughts about ruling and return to depose the man that had left him in charge. All the while this was happening, Benedict had gotten the reputation for sodomy, rape, murder, and other unspeakable deeds. Even the 19th century historian Ferdinand Gregorovius, a man critical to the faith, branded the 3-time pope a demon from hell in disguise of a priest. But was there truth to Benedict's wretched lifestyle, or was this rumor mill being churned by political enemies? It's possible, but the fact that money got to him in the chair and got him to leave it doesn't bode well for the crooked leader. But he wasn't the only pope to benefit from nepotism and financial influence. Pope Alexander VI amassed enough of a fortune from climbing the ranks of the church that he was able to pay off 2 competitors vying for the coveted throne of the Papal States. He may have succeeded in his ambition, but his empire was built on sand. He fathered 7 illegitimate children from his mistresses and had no qualms paying them lavishly through the church fund. Anytime his bank account was empty, he would simply hire new cardinals in return for payment or extorted rich people using trumped-up charges or jail time. He was, in essence, a mafioso, so corrupt that at the time, his surname, Borgia, became shorthand for low papal standards and corruption, especially that of nepotism and libertinism. He repented his actions, it is claimed, on his deathbed, but this could be seen as trying to save his own soul. It seems to be the logical use of the last breath for a man who is only concerned about himself. Many popes accused of selfishness would deny it, but not Pope Leo X. He famously said, "Since God has given us the papacy, let us enjoy it." When it came to spending, Leo's lavish lifestyle was like no other. A patron of the arts, education, and charity, he was certainly a man whose scholarly ambitions raised the status of the church. However, his indulgences and political ambitions were so costly that he was reduced to pawning off furniture, jewels, and statues from the palace. There have been many popes who have run the church into debt, but only Leo had to host a yard sale. Yet, that didn't stop him from borrowing huge sums from creditors, all of whom were ruined when Leo died. He may have lived the high life, but the cost was for others to bear, and there appears to be no sign that guilt weighed him down. The second place goes to Sixtus IV, who is guilty of many of the sins of the other popes on this list, but topped them all. For starters, his large sexual appetite landed him 6 illegitimate children, one from an incestuous relationship with his sister, yet would charge priests who had mistresses and created taxes for prostitution. He was so interested in policing the transgression of others that he set up the Spanish Inquisition, and was personally involved in the infamous Pazzi conspiracy, an assassination plot to displace the rulers of Renaissance Florence. His final parting gift to the world was to create legislation that made it illegal to enslave Africans, assuming they had converted to Christianity first. Whether or not conversion was sincere or forced did not seem to bother Sixtus. However, there can only be one worst pope of all time, and what sets Pope Paul IV apart is that despite being the head of the Catholic Church for 4 years, he used this time to act upon his own personal prejudices. His anti-Semitism knew no bounds. He installed Jewish-only ghettos and, in an eerie foreshadowing to lived memory, forced Jewish citizens to publicize themselves by wearing yellow hats. Censorship reached new heights under his papacy too. Fig leaves became the known symbol of his restrictions, and he banned all books written by Protestants as well as Italian and German translations of the Latin Bible. He imprisoned Catholic cardinals he accused of being secret Protestants, or at the least, that was the excuse he gave for getting rid of the competition, and he stepped up the Inquisition. Not content with the truce between France and Spain, he instigated wars that ultimately hurt the people of the state and threatened the stability of the region. Even his austerity was too much. Begging was outlawed, yet charity was limited. Under his rule, people were forced to squalid conditions, denied chances to improve their lives, and punished for any indiscretion. So tyrannical that he had a chest for complaints to which only he had the key. As one can imagine, not many people were brave enough to stick their heads above the parapet. But eventually, they did. As word spread of his ailing health, angry mobs formed to get justice. A statue of his had a yellow hat placed on it, was given a mock trial, decapitated, and thrown into the Tiber River. The crowd even broke into prisons and freed 400 inmates from the Inquisition. Not content to stop there, the amassing city folk broke into the office and murdered the Inquisitor. The papal palace was even ransacked, restoring much of the austerity he forced on people, and finally set on fire, destroying much of the Inquisition's records. Not many popes have their legacy go up in smoke, which makes this 4-year turnaround especially impressive. But if you want to know how some popes supported and even funded colonization efforts, go and watch our video on why the church supported colonization despite it not being profitable. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe to keep on learning how history works.